All right. So today we'll be talking about Hilel and also about Shamai. Like in order to fully understand Hilel, um, we also need to know who Shamai was, because they kind of, to an extent, complete each other, and also uh, they they make things difficult for each other at at times. Okay. So if we look, this is the page of the Tanaim and Amoraim. If someone wasn't here last week, um, the concept of the shiur is to go into the lives of the Tanaim and the Amoraim, like our sages, and to see what led them, what was their backgrounds, um, and why they decided to do halachot the way they did, and also what we could learn like on a personal level for our lives. Um, so we could see Hillel and Shamai are the top two, the first Tanaim. Like they're both of them were from the time of it's called the Zugot, which is the couples, which was the time that came before the Tanaim, and they are the ones who began like they were at the middle biduk between the Tanaim and the Zugot. So here, whoever has a little crown over the head was a nasi, was the president. So he was the political leader of Israel, but also often he was also the spiritual leader of Israel. And here was Shammai on the exact opposite side, um, who was the Av Beit Din, who was in charge of the court. So from their positions already, you could see that they like might give each other a hard time. But let's begin. So Shammai, he was before we begin. I'd like to mention David Berger. He is the one who put this shiur together in Yeshivat HaKotel, who I took part of in this shiur of his. He also put together the Mikorot sheets. So this is very much to his credit. Okay. So there's a word that's gonna be used a lot to describe Shammai, and that is kapdan, a makpid. That's someone who takes something very, very seriously, is very intense about a certain thing. He wants just the truth from that specific concept, from whatever it is he's talking about. And Shammai, that was something that was a very, very strong characteristic of his, that he wanted the truth and he wasn't willing to budge left or right in order to achieve that. So the first thing, this is from a lot of the Mikorot, a lot of the Mikorot that we're going to talk about were from Masechet Shabbat, from the same two places, from Lamed Amud Bet to Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph. And that's where the topic of Hilel and Shamai and the comparison between them came up in depth within the Gemara, and it came up in other occasions too. So the Rabbanim, like they told us, Le'olam yeh Adam anvatan kehilel ve'aliyem kapdan keshamai. Forever a person should be gentle and humble like Hilel, and he shouldn't be, so here it says impatient, but like we said before, it's more like serious and intense about a certain subject, like Shammai. And they give us examples of how this, like why this conclusion came to be, and how they were different, how there are different approaches, how we could see them. So there was a certain goy, like someone who was not Jewish, who wanted to become Jewish, and he wanted to do it in order to learn the whole Torah on one foot, it's called, like very quickly and very simply. So he went to Shammai and told him this. He said, please make me Jewish so I could learn it all so quickly. And Shammai heard this, and this wasn't accepted by him. And he had in his hand a ruler, kind of a T-square. It's like a ruler used for building. He had this in his hand, and he pushed him away. He's like, I don't want, that's not an approach I'm willing to accept. And he pushed him away. And immediately afterwards, he came to Hilel, the same Jew, this same guy that wanted to become Jewish, and he told him, "Please make me Jewish so I could learn everything very quickly." So he came, and Hilel, first thing he did was he converted him, and then he told him, okay, you want to learn everything right away? דעלך sani לחברך lo ta'avid. So here we have it down here. What is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbors. Or like in Hebrew, מה ששנוא עליך, אל תעשה לחברך. Which is a very similar concept to what we learned last week with Rabbi Akiva, where he tells us, like you should love your fellow like you love yourself. So that's as far as Hilel is concerned. That's the Torah. And once you manage to get to this level of not doing whatever is hated upon yourself to others, then you understood everything. So that's the first example of this, where someone came to Hilel and he was willing to convert him for a seemingly like a maybe silly reason. The next story, let's go down to also the translations is in it. You have a certain person that saw the Bigdei Kehuna of the Kohen Gadol, like the clothes of the Kohen Gadol, and he said, wow, they're beautiful. I also want to wear these. So he came to Hilel and to Shamai, and he told him, Shamai, could you please convert me because I want to wear these beautiful clothes of the Kohen Gadol? And Shammai heard that's not a legitimate reason. He took his ruler, again, this T-square, and he pushed him. He wasn't willing to, that wasn't a good enough reason for him. Later, he came to Hilel and said, please, Hilel, can you convert me? I want to wear these beautiful clothes of the Kohen Gadol. Hilel converted him and told him, in order to become a king, first you need to learn all the arts of the king, or all the things that the king needs to know in order to actually become a king. Which is interesting, he used the word king when he asked to be the Kohen Gadol. That's because I guess he knew that Kohen Gadol he cannot be because he's not a Kohen. Perhaps using the word king was at least not completely lying to him. Later, the same Jew that indeed converted understood he's not going to become a Kohen Gadol, he's not going to become a king either. But he was very, very grateful to Hilel for bringing him into the world of the Torah, and bringing him under the Kanfei Shechina, like the Shechina of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And indeed, him and two other people who converted similarly for similar stories, all said that if not for Hilel being so accepting of them and so considerate, they would have never gotten this joy of or this feeling of being under the Shechina of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And if it was for Shammai, so they would have never gotten to enjoy this at all. Like, as far as he wasn't concerned, there would have never been exposed to this world. That maybe explains to us why we shouldn't be kapdanim. We shouldn't be so strict like Shammai, and maybe we should be more humble and or more kind like Hilel. So just about the topic of the T-square of that of the ruler, it's interesting because they just gave two stories that he was holding the same ruler and pushing them. So this is a book called Ainaya, which is by the Rav Kook, in which he explains the midrashim, like the hidden meaning behind them, behind a lot of the midrashim, which are often not very simple to understand. Like the midrashim are stories that often don't make sometimes any sense, or like it's clear that there's something hidden here. So Rav Kook goes in depth, like into each one, and explains the logic behind it, or maybe what's secret, the sod behind it. So he said that we could see here about Beis Shammai, like about Shammai himself, that this ruler represented how calculated he was. Like everything had to be very calculated, very structured, had to make perfect sense, and had to completely align with the truth. As opposed to Hilel, which was more Rahman. He had like a lot more like he was more of emotional feelings. Like he understood like to the people's heart. So these are two completely different approaches, and we'll go more into that later. So this was Hilel said in Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot, often we will see mamash what summarizes a certain person, and what represents his ideologies most clearly by what he said. So Hilel said, En bur yerechet. A fool cannot get to this level of yirat chet, of like fearing God and fearing punishment. Velo am haaretz chasid. And a person that is not intelligent can or doesn't know too much can't get to the level of a chassid. Lo habayshan lamed. A person who's shy and doesn't ask questions, for instance, so he cannot learn. Velo hakapdan melamed, which is what we put in bold because that's on our topic. And a person who is too strict cannot teach. So, like, what does this mean? If we imagine, for instance, someone who's now a chozer b'tshuva, who's becoming more religious, and beforehand he didn't know anything, and he didn't know how to do any halacha or anything like that. If right away you're extremely strict with him and you're telling him, "Oh, this is," and you're forcing him to do the hardest things, he won't be able to actually complete the process. He will be like kind of defeated, and he won't be open. Like also, his heart won't be open to learn from you because he doesn't. It's not relatable. So a lot of times in education or when you're meeting new people and you want to teach them, so first you need to gain their trust and their respect and be kind to them. And once you have that, so they're much more willing to learn from you. So he said, if you don't have this quality of patience, so you can't actually teach, or if you're just too strict with them. This is also interesting. We'll continue. Let's just finish this book also. Velo kol hamarbe baschora machkim. Like if you're too busy, or you think that by getting a lot of like doing a lot of trade and selling and buying, like you'll be smart. So that's not how you become smart. ובמקום שאין אנשים, השתדל להיות איש. And in a place where people aren't human or there are no humans, you try to be a human. Like it's not, you can't use the excuse or have excuses like, oh, everyone around me isn't behaving or isn't acting properly, and therefore it's legitimate for me to also not act properly. You be human, like do the right thing anyways, or even be a leader. Just in this case. We're not going to go through all the mikorot because this is two classes combined because we don't. Ideally, we would have 30 classes. So now we're going to go to emet velo shalom, like the opposites between Hillel and Shamai, where Shamai, it's very important for him, the truth, and not necessarily shalom. And obviously, we're not talking about peace and like the ultimate ideal, because for Judaism, we pray for that in the end of every Shmona Esrei and in Tfilat Amidah, and also in the end of every Kaddish. Like that's the ultimate goal, peace for the world. Obviously, that's not the meaning behind like Shammai. Obviously, that's his ultimate goal too. This is more in the topic of Shlom Bayit. Like right now, like how people are connected, that's less important than the actual truth. Like if you're not having the truth, so as far as you're concerned, that's not. That's the first thing is first let's have the truth, and then like let's work on having peace between each other. So here in Masechet Gitin, this story, this halacha, is about a certain piece of wood that someone stole. Someone stole a certain piece of wood, and he used it to put down the foundations of a house. And later, the whole entire house built around this piece of wood. So they're arguing with the halacha if you need to give that certain exact piece of wood back, or just the money for it. So Beit Shammai say, destroy the whole entire house, take it down, get that piece of wood, and then rebuild it, because that piece of wood is the truth. That's what was stolen. And he even has down here in Sefer Vayikra, as far it says in the Chumash, that's what you need to do. You need to return exactly what you stole. As opposed to him, we have Beit Hilel that says, no, don't do that. Don't destroy the whole house. Bring down that back, or a similar piece of wood, or the amount of money that piece of wood is worth. And so how could this be? How could it? It's a contradiction to what we see in the Torah. Rashi says that the reason he was willing to kind of bend the rules for this is mipnei takanat hashavim, for like the people who are returning, or like chozrim b'tshuva. It's to enable people that want to correct or to fix whatever mistake they made. In order for them to be able to do it, he said, if it's going to be too big, too much, if it's you're going to have to destroy the whole entire house, they're just not going to do it. And therefore, he's willing for them to bend the rules so that if they want to, they'll be capable of actually doing it without having like their emotions or something stop them, because really destroying a whole entire house for a piece of wood, that's something very, very, very hard to do. So in order to enable doing it, he allowed bending the rules. So elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. So the things of Shammai, like what we said up until now about Shammai, he seems like it's not very relatable, and not so. It doesn't seem like like the right way, like the Jewish way, let's say. But obviously, he's such a big Tana. He's such a big deal. He's the Gedol Dor. So many people followed him that obviously we need to learn from him something. And both the words of Hilel and also the words of Shammai, they both have truth to them. So let's learn a little bit about the truth of Shammai, what we could learn from him. So in Sefer Mishlei, which is a book written by Shlomo Melech, where he gives you many psukim that most of them stand for themselves about musar, or like how we should act. So one of them is they're talking about if you're too strict with if you're too lenient with your child, and you're never telling your child no, or never stopping him from doing certain things, so you're not educating him. And they're even using the words here, like if you're never saying no to your child, so you hate him, as opposed to if you discipline him, so that's a sign of love, which is the classic story of a teenager that is upset with his parent for only letting them be on the computer for 2 hours. Oh, you hate me, that's the reason you're not letting me play more time on the computer. So, and then obviously the mother replies, no, ma pitom, I'm doing it because I love you. Like the reason I'm disciplining you is because I love you. And eventually, like if you're never ever going to say no, and if a kid always gets what he wants, and he's going to come out spoiled, and also he's not going to actually know how to interact with the world the second he actually needs to. So it is important what Shammai does of being strict and saying no and saying like what the right thing to do. Obviously, there's a place to that. If there was only too much chesed, which is like Hilel, it's too accepting, too tolerant. So there's no balance, and that could definitely hurt the person. And the final thing, we're gonna also summarize also Shammai and Hilel. We're also gonna give more examples of like the differences between them. But for now, this was the Shiur and Shammai, and we're gonna go into Mamash Hilel, which is the main purpose of loving every Jew for who he is. And last final thing about Masechet Avot, Shammai Omer. This is what Shammai says: Aseh Toratcha keva. Do like make Torah learning or Torah a permanent part of your life. Say very little and do a lot. Like that makes sense. That's the mentality of Shammai. Like don't, if everything is clear and everything is written down, like don't talk too much. Just do. That's it. A very strong lesson in life. Sometimes you just have to do. And v'haveh mikabel et kol adam b'seder panim yafot. And get like any person that you meet or see in your life, be very like smile towards them and be kind towards them. So obviously we're seeing that obviously Shammai also, don't mistake that he doesn't have derech eretz or anything like that. Obviously it is important to accept everyone with seder panim yafot and being kind. And you would maybe think like if someone is very, very great and someone is very like big in a certain subject, like he could think, oh, I don't have time for people. I don't have they're not worthy of my attention. I don't need to smile towards them. So no, Chas v'shalom. So Shammai was such a huge person, and if anyone was busy, it was him. He still accepted, like he was still kind and smiley towards every person, even though he was also very strict. Also, okay. So now more on Hilel. So Hilel and Shammai, like now we're teaching what Hilel and Shammai got, but more Hilel. Be like the Talmidim, the students of Aaron. Aaron was known for his shalom and how much he chased peace. If there were two people, person A and person B, and they were in a fight, and none of them was willing to come towards the other or forgive the other, he would go to person A and tell him, person B says he's so sorry and he wants to be in peace with you again and go back to the connection he used to have. And he would go to person B and tell him person A said the same thing, like he loves you so much, which it wasn't true because none of them were willing to say that. But the second they both heard that the other person is willing and wants to come towards them, they made up and they loved each other again. So it was important for Aaron, and Hilel teaches us the same thing. Like you should chase peace, and we also have in the morning we say that we should always try and make peace between a man and a woman, and between two people who are disagreeing between each other. And in addition, he finally also says, "Ohev et habriot," like love all of the creations, umekarvan laTorah, and bring them closer to the Torah. Now, Rav Kook says that these are two separate things that both stand for themselves. Ehov et habriot, first of all, love the creations regardless, and also try to bring them closer to the Torah. Like don't do that in order to do that. These are two things that stand for themselves. So how is he practically gonna achieve these midah also that we saw towards now up until now of patience and of humbleness? There's a story about Hilel where there were two people who had a bet, like made a bet between them, that one person said I could upset or I could even irritate Hilel, and the other person says no, you can't, and they bet for 400 zuz that the one person was not going to be capable of getting Hilel upset or making him upset. And this is how the story goes. This is how he tried to irritate him. So it was Friday afternoon, right before Shabbat. Everything was obviously very hectic. And Hilel, which was, if we remember, he was the Nasi, he was the president or the political leader. He was a very, very respected person. And he finally got to the nachat, to the calm moment, like right before Shabbat of showering. And he put shampoo on his head, like he started to wash his hair. And someone said in a very disrespectful manner, Hilel, where's this Hilel person? Doesn't anyone know where Hilel is? I want to ask him a question, like not in a respectful way. Hilel quickly dries up and goes outside to greet this person. And the person asks him a very, very silly, like ridiculous question, which might have like a deeper meaning as far as like sod or something secret. But as it's defined here, it's just a very silly question. Wait, let's see. Yeah, so the English is also here. So he asks him a very silly question, and then Hilel replies to him, "Oh, son, what a beautiful, beautiful question. That's a wonderful question. I'm so happy I asked that." And then he goes and he answers him this silly question. And so they separate, like they each go their way. And Hilel goes back into the shower. Again, he finally has a shampoo. And again, right as he's washing, the same person goes out and he says, Hilel, where's this Hilel person? Again, in a very disrespectful manner. And Hilel comes out and greets him again. Another ridiculous question. And again, Hilel tells him, what a wonderful question, beautiful question. Thank you for asking. And he explains an answer to that. And a third time, it repeats itself. And after the third time, the person is very upset already at Hilel. And he tells him, I wish nobody was like you. You're so mean, you're so evil. And Hilel replies to him, he asks him, why are you saying this? That's not a nice thing to say. And the person replies, because of you, it's your fault. I lost 400 zuz. We had a bet that I will make you mad, and I lost because of you 400 zuz. And Hilel replied calmly. He said, it's worth it. It's good that you lost 400 zuz and you didn't irritate another person or make me upset. So this story always reminds me of the Rabbanim of like around the Ir Hatikah, of the Kotel, like older Rabbanim with like a big beard, extremely wise, extremely respected around the people who know who they are, like their Talmidim. they're always very respected, and always like around the Kotel and around the Ir Atika, there's people who are secular or were never too close to religion, and they didn't know, like they don't know how to treat them, but they're like biduk starting a process of tshuva, and they're very interested. They always approach them like in ways that seem on the side, they seem so disrespectful, and always the Rabbanim have the biggest smile, and they're so warm, and like they light up, and they answer so calmly and so nicely. And I think this is a midah, this is a value that it's very real. Like you see them, and it's a very real, like they see a person and they see the positive. They see like, wow, this person was so far, and how long, like how far he was, and how much of a fight it was for him to get to the point where he comes to the Yatika and he asks a question to a rabbi. They see that in them, and they don't see like the disrespect or anything like that at all. Mamash, you see, they don't see that. And I think that's a lot of what Hilel represents. He represents that patience. He represents like understanding that there's another person, and like we see through the halachot that he decided to bend the rules because he sees there is like what is going on in the other person's mind, and how will like I help him get to a closer and better level. Like what do I need to do in order to achieve that? So that was a story about how humble he was, and now we're gonna see soon. We're gonna see how he got to this midah. But first, we'll see. I don't know if you know, but in machlakot between Beit Hilel and Beit Shamai, like in conflicts between them or disputes between Beit Shamai and Beit Hilel, the halacha, like what we decide is the truth, is through Beit Hilel. And for 3 years, it wasn't clear like who we should go by. And then a bat kol, kind of like an angel, came out and said, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim, like both of the things that are saying, also Shammai and Beit Shammai, and like the Beit Shammai and Beit Hilel are the students of Shammai, or the students of Hilel in their Beit Midrash, and their where they study. So they're saying both of them are true, and both of them like are beautiful, like things like are correct by God. But for halacha, like for the truth, like what we're actually going to do, it goes through Beit Hilel. And then the question arises, if they're both true, so why do we go through Beit Hilel? And the Gemara explains. They say, first of all, they were nochin ve'aluvin here in the first bolded part. They were very like comfortable. They were very like pleasant people to be around, and they were aluvin, which generally when you say the word aluv, it's a negative thing. Like it's someone who doesn't kind of even deserve respect. Here it's used in a good way. Like they didn't like chase respect. They didn't seem like people you have to respect. That's not the first thing you saw. That's not what you saw about them. So they're very modest. In addition to that, they also, when they studied both the things of Beit Shammai. Like they first said, this is the reasoning, this is the logic behind Beit Shammai, and only then they did their own. They said, well, like, what is our logic? So they took that patience, and they took that time, and that respect of saying, this is what Beit Shammai says, and this is our reasoning. And since they did that, they had the privilege, or they earned the fact that we do halacha through them. And in addition, we learn, in addition to the fact that that we do halacha through them, because of that, we also learn a few things. So it comes to teach us that whoever like kind of lowers himself, so God makes him rise, like rises him, and whoever like makes himself rise and like makes himself big, God puts him down for that. Like he humbles him. Similarly, anyone who's chasing bigness, so the bigness, like the greatness, runs away from him, and whenever runs away from greatness, then that doesn't interest him. So greatness runs after him, and then achieves greatness. And the last thing, whoever like kind of chases the time, so you could say the time chases him, or he kind of loses in the fight of time. And anyone who kind of lets time do their thing, he gets time, like time is on his side. So I'm not sure exactly what the definition is of that. How I understood it was like through my life when I was in college. There were two different situations in my life in college. One of them, I was always like very busy and very like I tried. All I did was study. Also on Shabbat, I would have textbooks and I would even study on Shabbat. I wouldn't put time into myself for working out. I would eat while I'm studying. Literally everything in my life and everything I gave time was for studying. I didn't study. I didn't have a lot of time to like study Torah. I tried very hardly, but it was difficult. And as opposed to that, the following year, after the break, I understood, okay, this is not the ideal. This is not the ideal way to live. And I started putting time into also learning Torah. Shabbat, I wouldn't touch at all the textbook. I would take time to eat, like take a eating break and like eat and slowly. And I would look outside and I would appreciate nature. Like I took time and at the time like do its thing. And really like at the end of the second like kind of year, I felt like time was by my side. And at the end of the first year, I was always in pressure, always with my tongue out, always felt like I didn't have any time. And as far as the grades or success went, so there was even a negative correlation towards like the chasing time. Like I even got worse grades when I was chasing time than when I was kind of letting it like be. But I'm not sure that's exactly the definition here. That's what I managed to understand from it. So now we're asking, how did Hilel get to this value of patience and of loving the others? Like what's more important for as far as this year goes? Like he didn't chase greatness. He didn't try to rise himself. Like he tried to lower himself a much, and that's what made him so great. So how could he achieve this? So we learned that when you go to heaven and you're kind of facing the court of heaven, they ask you, like, it doesn't matter if you were poor or rich or evil. They ask you, why didn't you put more time into your life into studying Torah? And if your answer is because I was poor and I was busy getting groceries, so they asked them, were you as poor as Hilel? So that's the example of like real poorness. Like if you weren't as poor as Hilel, so what is your excuse? So how poor was Hilel? The English, I'll try going down as we go. But at any rate, I'll just put only the English. So sorry, I'll just do that. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Hopefully you can see more of this like this. So Hilel, in order to study Torah, what he would do, he would work every day, and he would take half the salary he had and pay the guard with it. Like in order to, it wasn't an annual fee of studying Torah or a weekly fee even, it was every single day. You'd pay the guard in the entrance, and that's how you get to study Torah. So every day he would take half the money he made and pay the guard to get in and study, and half the money he had he would pay the groceries with. And one time this wasn't even enough, and he couldn't go into he didn't have enough money to pay the guard to get in. So what he did, you might know this story, he went on the top of a window. This was Friday afternoon, and he wanted to study, like to hear what the big Chachamim were saying. And he put himself as close like to the window as possible, and he would listen through the top, like it was a window on the top of the house, of the building, of the Beit Midrash. And it happened to be a very snowy day, like similarly to today. And he got completely covered in snow, like while listening. And that he spent the whole entire night. This was already Shabbat. He spent the whole entire night there. And the next morning it was dark, and so the people who were in the Beit Midrash looked up to see like, why is it so dark? Because there was snow there, and as they were looking up, they saw that that Hilel was completely like on the window. So they quickly took him out, and they even put on fire in Shabbat in order to save him. But it teaches you how much it was important for him to learn Torah, and I think it maybe could be argued that he might have been poor intentionally, because he was so wise, and later he became the president, became the president. So he was so wise. So there's no logical reason why he wouldn't be able to find a job and like afford a decent living. So to like strengthen to be this point, sorry. To strengthen maybe this point, we could see something that Hilel said again in Pirkei Avot. He said, "Marbe vasar, marbe rima." That's like rima is worms. So whoever has a lot of meat has a lot of worms because of the meat. And similarly, whoever has a lot of property has a lot of worries. Like if you have a lot of money and a lot of property, so naturally also your worries go up. So I think we can learn from here that maybe intentionally he was poor. And this is an absolute truth. Like the fact that Hilel says this, so we learn that there is a truth to actively being poor, and we see that with a lot of chachamim. But as opposed to them, we also have a lot of chachamim, like for instance, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, which was the wealthiest person in his time. Like it's not necessarily a contradiction at all, but it's a question of how could you maintain also being very wealthy and also being very humble, because humble, you have to be very humble. So Bezrat Hashem, after spring break, we'll also get to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and see how he achieved this level of humbleness, even though he had this money. But as far as Hilel was concerned, he felt like it wasn't possible for him to be humble if he had too much. So he maybe actively made himself poor. I know as far maybe as I like for me in my life, there were times where I felt like there was things that I was too proud of, and I wasn't humble because of them. Like things that were in my life that made me not humble, and I mamash prayed every single day to God. I was like, God, either I don't know, like Chas V'Shalom take this from me, or make me be able to be humble even though I have these things. Like, so it's a fight. Like a lot of times, maybe it's not worth having something if it doesn't serve your ideal of eventually being humble. Okay, this is the last makol. We'll try to do it quickly and then summarize everything. This is the last makol from Masechet Gitin. It's talking about something called a pusbul, which is something that Hilel instituted. In the Shana Shvi'it, in the Shnat Shemitah, there's a halacha, there's a rule that if someone had any loans or someone borrowed money from people, that's canceled in the Shnat Shemitah. So for instance, next year is Shnat Shemitah. That means if someone borrows now money, next year he won't owe anybody that money anymore. And then you would think maybe since this is a rule, so maybe people would think it's not worth it for me to give money during the 6th year, naturally, if I'm not going to get it back. And the Torah orders us, maybe because of this or in general, let's have the bolded with the English, don't like harden your heart or like close your hands like when someone asks for money in any situation, including this. Like this cannot, it's not legitimate to not lend or give money if you have, even if if next year you're going to lose it all. And again, Hilel understood and he saw the reality in which people were just not giving money because of this, and they were just going against this rule because it was very difficult. Because at the end of the day, it's not that easy. So both the people were sinning by not lending money, and also people were poor, and he understood what it is to be poor. People were poor because they couldn't borrow any money. So he again made a rule that you could do a certain just a certain piece of paper which says that I'm lending you money, but in condition that you pay me after the 7th year, that it doesn't count as if you can't borrow from me anymore. And that goes back to kind of bending the rules or like thinking that what could I do in order to make things more possible for other people to do. That's exact opposite of what we saw with Shamai. And now we're gonna try to compare the two. So first from Hilel, we learned patience, like we said, and in Hebrew, the word savlanut, it could mean on the one hand, patience, and also sevil, it can also mean like suffering. So even when you're suffering, you still need to be patient. and this kind of reminds me of something my mother taught me. Like one night in the middle of the night, we were talking, and we were talking about Shema Lamita, bed night Shema. And there's a portion there where you say that anything that anyone has done for me today or ever, I completely forgive him for that. And I hope that he doesn't get punishment for whatever I feel. Like he shouldn't get punishment for anything that I feel because of what he did to me. And that's a concept that's a little bit maybe hard to understand. Someone just did something mean to me. Why would I forgive him? And the concept is that whatever happened to me or whatever is happening to me needs to happen to me. Like that's something God put. Like it doesn't matter who it was. That's an interaction that had to happen to me, and therefore I should forgive him for that. And I think as far as patience goes, that's a strong, like, that's something that much helps you achieve this level of patience. Understanding that whoever is in front of me, whatever, anything I'm exposed to, that's something I needed to be exposed to. And whoever it was that tried to offend me or was mean to me, I should be patient towards them, and not like hold a grudge. And at any rate, I should be loving to any person anyways. And as opposed to maybe Shammai that tells you you shouldn't think too much like how the other person is feeling. If he's not doing the truth, it's not the truth. Hilel is saying, think about what the other person is thinking, and help them as much as possible to achieve that. But it's also a little dangerous of an approach. Like if you only go through Hilel and you don't have Shammai to balance that out, you might get to a situation in which instead of pushing the person forward, you're only harming them. And that's so much something we saw, that if you don't punish or discipline your kid, that's like an act of hatred. So it's important to discipline, and at the end, like, someone could get stuck. If you're not willing to push them forward, they're going to get stuck. So what could we learn from this? I think two things. When it comes to education, it's important to do both, and to be both loving and accepting and understand how the other person feels, but also have like standards for that certain person. Like Shammai, I think there's something like very respectful about having a certain standard, believing in someone that they could get something done. That's important. But you also need to understand that certain person. And I think the second level is maybe on a personal level, like to ourselves. We need to be like Shammai. We should be strict with ourselves, and we should not like lower our standards, and we should always do like everything is try to achieve the complete perfection and truth, and not try to budge left or right from it. But as far as other people go, we should understand that it's another person, and maybe something's very easy for me, it might not be easy for him at all. And maybe we should even appreciate, like, we should, a lot of times, I'll give an example from my life. Before I went to before I went to yeshiva, I already did the army. Like, I did the army before yeshiva. And at that point, like, it was after my training, and any time that we had was like on our expense. And as far as sleeping goes, we could have also definitely less than 5 hours, and even less. And if we wanted to pray shacharit, that was on us. Like, nobody was giving us that time. And during that time, I went to the Mashak Dat, which is someone who's responsible of the religious atmosphere in the base. And I asked him about Birkot Shacha, what I could add, like, to Birkot Shacha, because I want to add a few more mizmorim. And he looked at me and he was like, he was amazed. He was like, wow, that's incredible that you want to add, even though like you're so busy. And he was so like loving about it. And as far as I was concerned, I wasn't even doing the full thing of doing all of the Birkot Shacha. Like, I wasn't even something wrong. I was just trying to improve it a little bit. I think the way he was looking at me was a very Beit Hillel kind of way. Like, don't assume that something is easy for someone, and like kind of see what's hard for them, and don't judge them because of that. And the final thing is to lower yourself, like so you could see, in Hebrew we say "Listakel begova einayim," like to see the other person in eyes view, like as if you're like on the same level, like we saw that Hilel did. Like, don't think too much like of yourself or proud of yourself, because otherwise you won't be capable of like seeing people in the same level as you, and affecting them through that, like loving them, accepting them, That's in order to achieve that midah of anava, it's important to practice that. Does anyone have any questions? If not, then I'll see you next week with Asad Hashem. We will talking about tshuva. It's a little different concept because it's not exactly about Tana or questionable. It's questionable about Tana, but Hashem, we'll see you next week.